I want to pick off something that not a lot of people will know about Mitch Russo, either because they're new to you or because maybe they've known you for a while. But you were actually an engineer by training. That was in your early vintage. You weren't a writer and a businessman per se, but an engineer. Can you tell us about those years and what you were up to then?
Sure. I really started as a child. I became fascinated with electricity and everything related to electricity. And so I read every book about Thomas Alva Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, as a little boy. And as I grew up, I just became a hobbyist, if you will. I used to build a lot of things. And so I kind of knew I was going to be in that field all of my life. And so when I finally got to the point where I realized that it was my time to be done with school and to pick a profession, I chose, of all things, color television repair. And so I enrolled in school to fix TVs. And in the very last term of school, there was a professor who ran a course called digital electronics. Now, I want to remind you, this is 1970. So it's a little, maybe it was 69. It was a little odd because really there were no digital electronics and TVs. But he, of course, realized what was coming and saw the future and therefore ran a course for us kids
Wow.
about how to integrate and fix TVs with digital electronics. But he took an interest in me and he called me up after a few days in class and he gave me a tattered old textbook, which I assumed was from his college days. And he told me to work through chapters 1 and 2 and come back tomorrow with the assignment done. And I said, sure. And I did. And I gave him the assignment and he gave the book back to me and said, okay, now do chapters 3 and 4. Well, this went on for the entire term. And I knew that I was the only one he was doing this with. And I was kind of enjoying it. I liked the attention. And at the same time, I was enjoying what I was learning. He was basically sharing his freshman and sophomore year courses on digital circuit design. And I didn't know that. I frankly just studied the book because it was so cool. And I was able to use basically electronic symbols to create circuits. And I started building electronic circuits first on paper and then in real life. And by the time I graduated, he said to me, Mitch, you will never fix a color television set in your entire life. You're going into the computer business. And
Great.
Frankly, he was right. And that's what I did.
Maybe an impossible question to answer, but do you think you would have come to that realization without the help of that great teacher? Like, would another teacher have come along and said, Mitch, you've got a deeper capability here than you're giving credit for?
Yeah, it's like you said, hard question to answer. I knew that I was very excited about the work I was doing. Eventually, I probably would have gravitated toward it. But without his help, I don't think I would have made the leap. In fact, it was because of his help that I was hired the day after graduation to work at a computer company in, of all places, Massachusetts. And I was living in New York at the time. So I accepted the job. I picked everything up and loaded it in the car and drove out to Massachusetts, where I took my first real job.
You can't end on everybody there. You have to say maybe a couple of words about that job, because I think that's a nice segue into.
Sure.
So what were you doing in Massachusetts?
Well, I was persuaded to come work for this company with the idea that I was going to be doing very cool engineering things. When I got there, it turns out I was in the quality control department, putting cardboard boxes over computers that were ready to ship, waiting for them to overheat. And if they overheated, I would do board swaps until I figured out why and then ship the computer. Well, that was completely boring. And so luckily, I another engineer appeared in my life and said, "You should work for Digital Equipment Corporation. They need people like you." And I was working at a competitor's company called Data General. So he arranged an interview. I showed up for a 4-hour grueling interview with the head of engineering, and they hired me on the spot and put me in the labs, which was fascinating. And so I had many exciting adventures at Digital Deck. And there I was working on the revolutionary new mini computer called the VAX 11780, which was the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I was working on the memory boards. It was fascinating.
Wow. What a cool
And
time to be alive, hey?
yeah,
And to be sort of just gifted with the particular gifts you had, but 20 years earlier or 20 years later, that unique period of time where computers went from the size of a house to the size of a room to what you were just saying, the size of a fridge, to
yep,
now something you can't see with your eye.
yes. And
Um,
they were really good to me. They helped me get back. I graduated with a technical associate's degree. They got me back into Northeastern University for an electrical engineering degree. And so I worked there part-time as I pursued my degree. But ultimately, I left college. I did not complete. And I decided that I was going to go to work at an engineering lab again and pursue my passion, which was circuit design. And then in doing so, I met another very instrumental person in my life who took me from that job into a semiconductor company called Mostech. They don't exist anymore. And then from Mostech, as a field applications engineer, I then transitioned into sales. And then from sales at Mostech, I started my first company, my real company, Timeslips
mhm,
Corporation.
mhm. And that one you sold to Sage,
Correct.
not Sage Us, but Sage the green colored IT business. Yeah.
Yes, Sage PLC. Yep.
Yeah. We've come across about 40 companies named Sage in our
Sure.
lifetime. In fact, I've spoken to the fellows at Sage in Singapore, and they don't hold it against us that our outfit. We're technically Sage Research Private Limited.com, headquartered in Singapore, and Sage Learning Private Limited. There's like a fly rod maker named Sage, and there's a couple of other unusual and quirky businesses with the name. Well, I want to dive into coaching. That's the
Sure.
theme that we're working on. And we've approached it from a few different perspectives, from people who do it at a very senior and executive level to folks who are trying to relay some of the discipline and the understanding of the clinical psychology discipline over to the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Coaching has a lot of definitions. Some of them are nearly in opposition to each other. But can we start there and just hear a few words from you about what the word means in the way that you use it, whether that's in your book or in your practice more broadly?
Sure. I think coaching in the simplest form is sharing experience. Usually coaches are people who've already done something who are helping others do what they've already done. And whether they do it on a psychological level or whether they do it on a technical level or on a procedural level, coaching is the act of helping another achieve something they have themselves already achieved.
Mm-hmm. So your book is written and entitled as Step-by-Step Guide. So that's very different than sort of an exegesis on something or a broad treatise on something. So maybe that's still the engineer in you. But why did you write it in that way as opposed to some other ways you may have?
Well, let's be clear. I have 3 books. And so my first book was about building virtual companies. That was called The Invisible Organization. My second book, which is the one you see here on the screen, that's Power Tribes, and that's about building certification programs that create multiple recurring revenue streams. My third book, called Coach Elevation, is this book here. And Coach Elevation is also a procedural book to accomplish one very specific thing. And that one very specific thing is alignment. So here's the problem, and I'll describe why I wrote the book and the solution that I deliver in the book. The problem is that when you work with another person, what you don't know is whether they are aligned with the work or not. So let me go back and define what aligned means. Aligned means that there's no friction between them accomplishing the goal and the pathway to it. So in the past, what I have encountered are people who are not aligned, who hire me to coach them. And it's very, very difficult to get them to do what it is that they need to do in order to reach the goal that they set. And in my work over the last decade or so, I've uncovered what I feel is the key element that stops people from doing that. And the key element, and others may call it something else, but I'll tell you what I call it. The key element that I have discovered is that most people are not operating at their true purpose. Now, what does that mean? That means that if you, as a true purpose, have a completely different objective than the business that you're in, and I'm a business coach, so I'll relate to it that way, then you are going to cause friction between the tasks you're doing, the way you feel, and what your true purpose, your soul's purpose, if you will, or your true purpose really is.
Mhm.
So the goal here is to create alignment initially, like upfront, immediately in session one, first task. And once you do that, then you then help the client get aligned with the business or the purpose of what they're doing. So there's two parts. There's the alignment to their true purpose, which is who they are, and then aligning their true purpose to their true mission, which is what they're doing. And there's one more step, which is basically their why. If you don't know their why and you try to do this, it's harder, can still be done, but it's harder. So what I do is I have them work through a very short why discovery quiz from Why Institute. I think it's a $30 quiz. But in the end, what we now have is we have enough information to do this alignment. Now, the book goes through this process step by step. And at the very essence of the process, which only takes once the quiz is complete and once the client is in a place where we can have a coaching session, takes 30 minutes or less. And the reason it doesn't take very long is because it's always been right at the surface, but most people don't pay attention to it. So I help them. I help them clear out the clutter and figure it out with me. I guide them. Two brains working on the same problem is far more effective than one stuck in the middle of the whole mess. And so what we do together is we understand and we discover, and it's very much a discovery process. I could tell you your true purpose, but it wouldn't have any impact or meaning at all. You need to discover it, and you need to feel what it feels like to finally uncover it in yourself. And when you do that, and you then look at the work you're doing and decide, is this my true mission or not? I've had coaching sessions with business owners who say flat out, "Wow, I'm in the wrong business."
The
And
owners.
yes.
Mhm.
And at that point, what we do is decide what the right business is. And with full respect to their current situation, I try to align what they're doing with their true mission. So in many cases, someone might come flat out and say, well, you know what? I don't even really want to be in this business anymore. It's completely unaligned to who I am. And I say, hold it, wait a minute. Let's see if that's really true or not. Because in many ways, we can align them to what they're doing if we shift their perspective. So this is, you got to understand, this is a much different type of coaching than I've ever done before. It's only developed because I needed to develop it. And I am unaware of anyone else having done this before. Now, if someone has, that's great. They probably do it better than me, but this is how I do it. This is what I discovered. And that's what I wrote about in Coach Elevation. Then I take them through a process of doing a full business plan, visual business plan using mind maps. And from there, we start building priorities. And priorities look like a timeline. And that's really the nature of the work that I do.
Wow. Who do you have sort of boundary lines for who you do it for and who you don't do it for in terms of specialization?
I found that the people that are attracted to me are business owners. It's not that I wouldn't, but it's not economical for someone who doesn't own a business to work with me. Because it's hard. I mean, look, I charge a fair amount of money for what I do, and most people who are not in business generally can't afford that. If you're in business and you realize that you need an ROI on what you spend on your coach, then I'm a perfect fit, because you'll get a ROI, probably quite a bit of an ROI, but you must surrender to the process. That's the whole thing. If you're not quote unquote coachable, if you don't listen and you won't follow instructions, then we're not going to get along.
Right. So when you find, let's say, misalignment, you described this in one case, right? That you say you're in the wrong business and now you need to reorient. I guess that works if you're talking to owners because it's still their business. It means they need to reinvent their business as opposed to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Correct.
so that means if you were doing that with folks who were, say, just the CEO underneath a board and so forth, and you find misalignment, they don't have the latitude to say we're just going to totally reinvent the business to suit my alignment. They actually have to just step out.
Well, I've never had anyone completely step out. I have had business founders make a decision that they need to refocus onto a different area of the company because it was out of alignment with what they were doing. Unfortunately, many CEOs, particularly those who start companies, once that company scales, they find that they've delegated the stuff that they love to do. And now they're doing the stuff they hate to do, like legal and accounting and HR stuff and hiring and firing. And that really wasn't why they started a company. Why they started a company is because they were excited about an idea. They wanted to build something, and they felt like they can create a lot of value in other people's businesses or other people's lives. But as that company scales, all of those fun tasks get delegated, and then they're left with the crap work. And so what I help them do is refocus on what it really is that they love and what it is that they started with that made them happy. Because in many cases, the crap work is the stuff that you should delegate, and the part that you love, you should keep. And a lot of people will say, well, you know what? I'm the CEO. I shouldn't be on the front line selling. And I said, that's right. You should be building sales organizations. You should be expanding in other countries. You should be creating. You're a creator. CEO has only two jobs, and that is to create and to communicate, nothing else. And if you're not creating and communicating, or if that's not the bulk of your time, then you're not serving the company well as the CEO.
One of the things that you said echoed with a conversation with Ruchira Chaudhry, who we spoke with a couple of interviews ago. You talked about one mind being stuck in the middle of the chaos versus two working together to kind of align and sort things out. She talked about one of the key roles of the coach to create clarity. And I think that really jumped out as quite a profound insight, although it's easy to pass over the first time you hear it. So can you maybe just talk about what goes on in terms of when you encounter, let's say you encounter them in the wild, in their natural environment, these business owners, where their mind's at, why it's so hard for somebody in that seat to just cut through the jungle on their own?
Well, I'll give you an example. I worked with a business owner, hired me, brought me into the company. It was a physical visit at the time. And I said, well, let's go into the conference room and let's start laying out the product line. I want to see everything on a whiteboard. Show me the entire structure of all the products you sell. And I'd like to know revenue on each product and profit on each product. And frankly, after the 8th or 9th product, I said, wait a second, what's going on here? And they said, well, this product got created and then we had another good idea. And so we did something else differently over there. And And so before long, what I started to see was that there were three core profit drivers of the company, and the rest were really wasting time and money. And so I said, well, let's at least have a mental experiment and say, let's cancel these other 7 projects here, focus on these 3. And for them, it was enormous clarity because no one had ever really presented it that way before. So a coach can see things that the CEO generally can't, and that brings clarity. And none of this is rocket science. I mean, you'd probably do the same thing if you were me in that same situation. But the bottom line is that I did it, and it created clarity, and that clarity turned into a change of direction for the company. So I totally agree with what you said.
Can you teach the way that you coach, or is it something that has a bit of a native talent streak?
Well, I do teach the way I coach. I have a coach cohort, a group coaching program for coaches. And that cohort runs, we start a new one every month, and it runs for 8 weeks. And I literally take people through my entire process step by step so they could duplicate it. And my goal is that they do. My goal, and when they graduate, is that they could run a session the way I do and run an engagement the way I do, and more importantly, get the testimonials that I'm able to get and the fees that I'm able to charge. So the process of bringing someone into the cohort is to basically elevate them as individuals and create new revenue streams for them, because they're able to do things that hopefully they really couldn't do before.
And so is coach elevation used as something like the textbook or the core document for that process?
Yes and no. The Coach Elevation book is sort of the first half hour of a full accelerator engagement. So the Coach Elevation process is the most important to many people because it's the alignment phase. Once Coach Elevation is complete, once the alignment phase is complete and we know the true purpose and true mission of the CEO and we know their why, at that point, we start building out the rest of the engagement. So my first session is always 2 hours. That's where we go through the Coach Elevation process, which I call the Russo method. And once that's complete, now we are mind mapping the entire business. Then we are prioritizing, and then we are goal tracking and holding CEOs accountable. And I have software that I created to do that. So I never found a coaching product that could do what I needed it to do in order to help my clients achieve the goals that we've set out together to achieve. So I built it myself.
That's really cool. We interviewed sorry, his name will come back to me in a moment, but it's a fellow from BTS, and they have 300 coaches in their broad organization and network. And they have consistency in their methodology, and it's in some ways a simple methodology, but that's the genius. It's not easy to simplify something like coaching, and they've done it. And they've also done it in such a way that it doesn't mean that they have to wait for magic chemistry between the coach and the player, or the coach and the coachee. And I think that was quite a accomplishment by them. Not to say it isn't much of an accomplishment to have 300 people on a desk out there doing things and so on.
Well, so what I've done is I built the software to manage a team like that from a single coach on. And the difference between what I do and what other people who build software for coaches do is that I have built in two-way accountability and goal tracking. And the session management system that I've created will typically save the average coach 15 minutes per session. So besides saving time, I'm giving coaches a tool they never had before to create goal tracking and accountability, and a portal for the client to log in and actually answer their own accountability questions and fill in their numerical basically their numerical tracking every single week. From
Mhm.
there, we are able to display graphs and charts and show the client on a weekly basis the progress that they're making with the work that we're doing together.
Mhm. So when you have, what is the cycle of somebody who comes into your coaching community or adopts your method? They find you, obviously, and I think maybe even some folks from our conversation will track you down and figure out how to get in touch. Then they take, well, maybe they read the book first, but they take the course that you're describing, and
Mhm.
then do they work with you for a while and they also do some other things on their own? They also coach in their own practice, or do they become entirely enfranchised in your method? How does that work?
Well, the thing that I do is generalized to the sense that if you have a process already, what I would teach a coach will simplify that process, expand its power, and at the same time give them a methodology that most don't have. Also, because they will now have access to the software, they can start using the software to help keep their own clients accountable and goal tracking as well. Once you do this, everything changes. So
Mhm.
results change, the testimonial quality changes, and usually in a matter of months, most of the coaches that I work with are raising their rates because they're more valuable now. They can get more done
Mhm.
much more quickly than before, and the testimonials show that. So,
Mhm. The guy that I forgot at BTS is Kareem Hasbani. So in case you know him or don't, just a lovely guy, very thoughtful. And by the way, also had a technical background, was just like a kind of in his case, a little more pure maths.
yeah,
But I think sometimes these technical folks have much more to offer in the world we might call sort of soft skills, EQ, et cetera, than they often give themselves credit for.
yeah. Well, I
And
kind
that,
of come from that background, so I would agree.
yeah, and I think maybe in Kareem's case, he uh, and you both have had the ability to come and create some system and order and structure on something which otherwise can just have the ordinary chaos of human engagement. Say like, hey, there can be a process here. There can be an A before B, and there can be clear fence lines where we say, look, this isn't part of what we do. That clearly is, but it's in this stage. So maybe no mistake that Mr. Hirani and yourself have come and sort of added this to the picture.
Absolutely, sure.
Um, I'll maybe put forward a autobiographical question. So Sage is, our work is to build academies at organizations. Very large organizations can afford an academy because they just have a ton of operating leverage. So if they build something like a learning and development team or an internal learning management system, or if they buy or create lots of learning content, that's fine.
Mhm.
It can be distributed across 10,000 employees and so forth. But if you're a team of 50, that looks like a very expensive luxury. Or for that matter, if you're a team of 10, or for that matter, if you're a team of 250. So in the sizes, that's a challenge. Unfortunately, that's actually one of the size of organization where a lot of learning should be happening. There's a lot of value on it because there's a leanness there. And so there's more premium on each mind and each professional there. So we build academies for organizations. We found a way to do that. We rely reasonably heavily on what we call faculty, which we might as well just call coaches, Mitch.
Mhm.
So these are very experienced people who otherwise would not be involved in such things. Coming along and saying, I'll help coach you, I'll help guide you, I'll help be a teacher on a very given topic. And so they get to show up in a core area of expertise, and they don't have to write a program. They don't have to build a curriculum or stand at the front and lecture for 2 hours. They just get to do the one-on-one for 45 minutes and make it all make sense.
Sure.
I think what's quite interesting, and I think people would like to hear this more broadly for their own companies. And I'm only giving you all that backstory to say that I would be an example even in my own area.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, besides the software that you mentioned, how do you keep track of what needs to be a reasonably large network full of individuals with their own interests and motivations and background bios and experience and so forth? You can call them all one thing, coaches, and yet you keep them generally aligned and uniform and adhering to a core way of doing things. So does that all boil down to the software, or there's some other techniques that you've learned and developed along the way?
Well, I mean, I've worked with larger corporations and companies as I've run some of them as well, 300-person organizations, and we've had learning management systems. And what we were missing was the software, that the Clientfolio software that I created, because we were unable to track what was going on once the university structure was in place. Certainly we had courses, we had quizzes at the end of the courses, which are fine. But even if somebody passed a quiz, we are very sure after years of experience that that doesn't mean they learned anything. And learning is not what you absorb from a course or a training program. It's the application of it. So I'll say something in a very broad way. Words don't teach. Only experience teaches. And if you are not teaching with experience, then you're missing half of the learning experience itself. So that's really what the Clientfolio software helps mentors, coaches, and educators do, is track the experience part of the learning system. So when we work with many of our coaches that use our software have employed learning management systems, but they still use Clientfolio to hold accountable their students to the material itself and the application of it. So I could teach you to sell all day long, but until you get on the phone and close a deal, you don't know how to sell, period.
Yeah, like reading a textbook on pitching. Well,
Yeah,
I said pitching, which is sales, but I was actually meant it in a baseball sense, like
sure.
reading a textbook on batting skills.
Right. Or bicycle riding, right? Read a textbook, do a study on how to ride a bicycle. And,
it's the perfect example, Mitch.
Yeah. Yeah. And then after that, let's see what happens,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the thing is, though, and this is really why I had no desire to create another software company at this stage in my life, but it was so compelling because simply nothing else was out there that I felt I had to do it. It was now I was driven to do it. And I was really, my attitude was, I don't care if anybody likes it or not. I'm doing it because I need it to continue to build and run my own coaching business. And it turns out people love it. And we kept expanding it. And now it's in its third iteration. So it's running teams now. It's helping coaches. It basically makes people successful because it gives them the tools they need to ensure that what they're doing is actually implemented. That's the hard part.
It seems to me like maybe there's a tension in here, and you can maybe release it for me. So when we're talking about what coaching is, you're talking about imparting experience. It's somebody sharing their experience, helping someone do something they themselves have done. But then I'm thinking about a number of the cohorts that you're talking about. Do you just not let people through or not graduate them if they're not sufficiently experienced?
Well, I wouldn't really admit anyone into the cohort unless they've had working coaching experience. So if you are a brand new coach and you want to join the cohort, we at some point might have a beginners cohort, but we don't now. Right now, I'm focused on elevating coaches. Coming back to the coach elevation word here, I'm in the process of taking a coach who's already a coach, who already has domain expertise, and taking them to the next level. That's to me a more fulfilling job than teaching someone to be a coach from scratch. A lot of the mindset issues related to coaching have typically been worked through, but we still deal with mindset in the cohort. That's one of the first things we do is we do a mindset breakdown right away with the cohort, and we help people spot where they're at. And if there are any limiting beliefs, we help them work through that, because ultimately we need them to be aligned with what they're doing in order to make and to go forward. So we employ the same coach elevation process with coaches as we do with clients when training them through the cohort itself.
I see. In my work, I think there's something that you just said that resonates, which is a lot of professionals just don't appreciate how much they know, how
Right.
much experience they have, how much they have to share, and really, it's not a luxury. They really need to. In our case, Mitch, that translates into them being instructors in a more formal way within their organization. You've built experience. It's now time for you to teach. I don't think that teaching is the same as coaching. But we need to come along, and when we look for subject matter experts for one of our clients at their organization, they're actually mainly within. They're already extant, right? They're inside the org chart, but nobody's necessarily pulled them out and said,
Mhm.
Kathy may be the world's top 3 experts in the thing that you most want to learn. She's right here. She's inside your org chart, and we just have to draw out of her the core lessons and structure them as curriculum.
Right.
That's its own kind of elevation. It's a different thing. We're not talking about coaching in that case, because that's a different discipline. But I really hear what you're saying, which is when folks have experience, if you can unlock it with a method or with a set of known disciplines like you've come along and offered, then suddenly you get a lot more out of the exact same person with the exact same background as they were able to do before.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, I'd like to take the analogy of sales. I would rather hire a 6 than a 10. A 10 super high-end closer guy whose ego is the size of New York and who has the greatest closing record of all. I'd rather hire a guy 4 levels under him and put good systems in his hands and teach him to basically elevate as well. Because look, ultimately, everything is a system. I guess maybe that's the way engineers look at the world. Everything is a system. And if you have a system for most things, you can accomplish things faster. It doesn't mean that you don't need intuition or experience. You do. That's how you reach the higher levels of your profession or of your expertise. But without a system, it becomes completely intuitive. And there are certain people out there that are completely intuitive and are masterful at it. I'm not that person. I'm a guy who basically uses systems that I've developed through experience to achieve goals that I know I can achieve time and time again with and for my clients.
Mitch, I don't want you to give away, any of the special sauce of the course and so forth, but can you go into the principles of sort of how you take people through that method or the essence of the method?
Sure. It's actually completely broken down week by week at coachelevationgroup.com. There we have the full curriculum. So you could look at it, what the week by week breakdown is. Cool. Here's what it comes down to. It comes down to getting oriented with a new client. Clearly the client has already paid you. They've hired you. So now you start the engagement. So in step 1 of what we teach in the cohort is align that client first. Just get it out of the way, do the Russo method, get coach aligned with client and client aligned with business immediately. After some practice, you could do it in half an hour. First time through, it might take longer. That's okay. But get aligned. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is, what is the problem that the client has come to you to solve? Typically, it may be clear or it may not be clear. So clarity is the second step. You have to make sure that when you begin the engagement, that you're both clear on what you plan to accomplish over a period of time. And so now you get clarity. And then from clarity, you build a structure that you can both agree on, that you could work with. So I can give you examples of what that looks like if you like.
Yes, please.
Sure. So a client comes to me and says, I want you to do for me what I want to be Tony Robbins. How do I be Tony Robbins? And my first answer is, you can't be Tony Robbins. There's only one Tony Robbins. Sorry. Because people know I worked with Tony for 5 years and I
That's
helped
right.
build a company with him. And the reason that I was part of that organization is because of the way I think. And it's because of the accomplishments I had in the past. And so when we started working together, my goal and my job was to basically be the guy behind the curtain and put the systems together and then run the whole company as a result of that, which is what I did. So if someone comes to me and says, well, I want to be so-and-so, I want to have this. And I said, well, okay, well, do you have the credentials to be this? And if they say, well, no, I say, well, okay, let's take care of that first. What are you missing? And they usually know what they're missing. And if not, we work on that together. Step two is, let's say they say yes. Now I said, well, okay, well, the difference between where you are and where you want to be are things you don't yet have. You don't have authority, for example, and you can't do what you need without authority, without preeminence. You have to create your presence in the world and the marketplaces that you work in. How do you do that? Well, we have tools that we use to do that. And so I show them the tools and we go through them together. And now they understand what they have to do to have preeminence, to have authority. And in many cases, this is a pathway that isn't quick. So, like, for example, if I said to somebody who is really on a mission, they could have a doctorate degree, they could be very smart, but no one knows them. Some of the ways to getting known are quite simple and straightforward, but most people don't know how to do them. So like you've created a show, a podcast. Well, that's a way of generating authority. And congratulations, you've done a great job. Having books is a way of generating authority. Having a platform is a way of generating authority. So we build those things if that's what the client needs. There are other cases I get involved in. People need a better way to sell. And so we create selling systems, whether it's an actual mechanical selling system like funnels and stuff. I don't do funnels. I have people who do funnels for us. But what I do is I build structures. So what I am, as it says on the screen, I'm a growth strategist. My strategies need to be tactically implemented, and I work with the client to get that done. I build certification programs. Why? Because certification programs help people scale their ideal client into a sales force. Most people have never heard of such a concept before. I blueprint the whole thing in my book that you could buy for $20. And then the book usually leads people to me. When they read the book, they go, I'd love to do this. There's got to be a lot more to it. How can we work together? And that's when I help them do that. So these are all things that I do with clients because of my experience and because I have a system in which to get it done. And when I take people through the cohort itself, what we try to do is isolate the skills that they are expert at and teach them ways of systematizing a way of delivering those. So like I said before, we teach session structure. So session one starts, as I described, with the coach elevation, the Russo method process. And then from there, we do the business mapping process. And then from there, we do a timeline process. And then from there, we set up their dashboards. So what is a dashboard? Well, for example, whatever client you work with, they have to care about numbers of some sort. If you're a health coach, you care about steps, calories, I don't know, whatever else you track. If you're a business coach, you care about sales and profits, and maybe you care about LinkedIn connections or whatever it is. It's a numerical factor. So what I do is I teach the coach to find those numerical drivers immediately and then build them into the client folio dashboard so we can track them every week. Then I teach them how to use accountability as a tool, not just a sort of a soft skill. I teach them how accountability is not a blunt instrument, it's precise. And you could create libraries of accountability questions. We actually provide a small library of about 30 accountability questions directly in the software. But ultimately, these libraries of accountability questions become a coach's asset that they can then reuse later with other clients who are in the same realm. Now we're really cooking here, because at the end of maybe the second session, this is again the structure I'm teaching, we have all of the coaching process in place to take a client through to the successful outcome they're looking for. Does any of this, did I miss anything, or does this make sense to you?
It's so interesting. I was being a disciplined guy, Mitch, and just letting you speak rather than jumping in and interrupting every couple of interesting words. There were several things there where I thought there's very interesting application in the business world. One of my questions was, after you finish with what you described are typically business owners, do you discover that they are just picking up your own method themselves and saying, I need my deputies, my direct deputies, to understand this method and approach?
Well, I generally work with a CEO to train his management team to work at the highest levels of efficiency. So if I'm working with a CEO, sure, I'm certainly working with the CEO directly. But one of the main issues when I work with CEOs is, what is their management style? Like, for example, one of the things I usually put an end to right away is what I call got a minute meetings. And so we have to put some time management in place. We can't have people bursting into your office, say, hey, got a minute? Because ultimately that destroys productivity and it destroys the structure of a company. So what we instead do is we create an agenda system so that every single report to the CEO must create an agenda and have a fixed meeting time every single week. And this changes everything. This one simple tool can change everything for the way an entire company operates. And one of the interesting things is that I had to be taught that by Chet Holmes, who I worked with directly when I was building the company with Tony Robbins, Business Breakthroughs International. Chet put me on that system, and I was the president of the company. So
right.
I loved it. I learned something very valuable, and then I passed that down to all of my direct reports, and that's how we operated. And for me, it changed everything.
Okay, so let's just dig into that, because people are going to find that so interesting, as I do right now. If I'm working inside the Tony Robbins organization and you're the president of the company, and I have up until then been accustomed to being able to pop in the door and say, hey, Mitch, you got a minute? What do I have to do after that? What does it mean to have to come in with an agenda?
Sure. So say you tell everybody, okay, we're changing the structure of how we communicate. No more got a minute meetings. And next day someone pops in and says, hey, Mitch, got a minute? I'd say, put it on your agenda. We'll talk about it when we meet on Thursday. And they walk out. Okay. Now, interesting situation is that what you'll find when you start doing this is that a portion, 20 to 60% of the problems people put on their agenda are generally solved by the time you actually have your meeting, because they've been using
Thursday.
Yeah, by Thursday. And they're using you as a crutch most of the time. Yeah. So I would never let someone come to me with a problem unless they already had two solutions and I get to choose which one I want or invent a new one. So I don't let people come to me as a leader and say, we have a problem. What do we do? My answer is, what do you mean, what do we do? You tell me what we should do. In fact, give me several ideas as to what we should do, and then we'll figure it out. Go ahead and go do that, and then come back when you're ready. In fact, put it on your agenda. We'll talk about it on Thursday. See, it's so important that you train people to think for themselves, and you train people to be creative. Creativity is part of every single human being, but if you don't use it, it evaporates. It's like any other muscle in the body. If you stop using it, you lose it. So you need to train people to use their creativity to solve the problems that they're having and not rely on you. Now, the hard part is that the guy that they're relying on, or the gal that they're relying on, usually enjoys that part of the job. Oh, I love solving problems. You kidding me? Yeah, but that also means that you're not doing your job, which is running the company.
Yeah, and teaching another generation to solve problems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. When that person shows up on Thursday, they probably have a fair few things. Although, as you said, maybe some of those things came on the agenda and then went off.
Right. And most of the time, what you get down to is you start really working on the important stuff on your weekly meetings with your team. The important stuff, meaning the stuff that moves the needle, not the petty stuff, the stuff that they could have solved on their own. They didn't need your help. And they soon come to realize that if they start coming to you with problems and no solutions, that you're not going to be tolerating that very well as the CEO or as the leader. And
Mhm.
eventually, if you get tired enough of it after you've explained exactly what you want over and over and over again, you can replace that person.
Mhm. Within your, this is one of the last questions because we've been gobbling up the time. Within your cohorts, do you see folks who really diverge from the sector? I'm just talking about sector experience now, Mitch, not just general executive experience. Say somebody comes out of container shipping,
Mhm.
and then are they able to jump across to, pharmaceutical sales and put in meaningful help? Or do you generally see that they tend to align with their historic industry experience?
I think most people align with their historic industry experience because that is where they have the domain expertise, and that
Mhm.
is where they have the wisdom from years of experience.
Mhm.
It's
I've
not
got,
it's not possible, you know.
sorry, go ahead.
I say it's not impossible for someone with a different domain expertise. Like, for example, I work with clients all the time that I've never helped anyone in that particular business, only because what I'm working on with them is the same basic structure as I do with other clients and other businesses. But if someone came to me and said, "Well, Mitch, we have this molecule that is just not solving the chemical problem we're trying to solve," time out, get not my field. I have no help. I can't help you at all. I mean, there are things just know. I don't know anything about molecular biology. I apologize. It's just not my field.
Mhm.
Find someone who's an expert in that, but that's not me. But
Mhm.
if you say to me, I have a medical company and we're trying to figure out how to scale the sales team or how to price a variation of the same products, then I'm your guy because I know how to price, I know how to scale, I know how to build sales and consulting organizations.
Mhm. There's two questions I want to hit you with. The last one is where people can find you, and I know there's more than one answer to that question. So it's for some folks it's very easy. They're like, oh, just hit me up on LinkedIn. But you have a few different irons in the fire. So that's the last one that I'll ask. But before then, we usually find that when we talk to people who are authors, there's some chapter or there's some key idea that hasn't found the incredible uptake that they know intuitively it deserves. So they sit there and they study and dwell with the material a lot. They go through the editing process, so they leave some good things on the cutting room floor. And then they watch the way that the world takes it up, and certain things just go like wildfire, and other ideas are less enthusiastically drawn. Is there an idea or two inside your book where you think, this is great stuff, but you haven't seen it catch fire in the way that you think it ought to?
Well, if you're talking about my latest book, Coach Elevation,
Yes.
the book is singularly focused on one thing, and that is helping the reader uh, go through a process of helping clients discover their true purpose leading to their true mission, and then using that as an alignment tool to the current work that they're doing with the client. It's a short book. It's less than 100 pages. It's very detailed, but it's very focused on that one process. In my prior book, Power Tribes, which is the one that you see here, Power Tribes um, is a concept that most people have never really thought about before. In fact, I named the book to be a little clever, that instead of calling it How to Build a Certification Program, I named it Power Tribes because one of the key components is community and culture. And most people who build certification programs don't pay attention to that. And unfortunately, I had to learn the hard way that that is actually the most important part of building any organization, its community and culture. And so what I did, again, as the systems guy that I am, is I created a set of tools that help people create community and culture, particularly culture, And I don't think that's talked about enough, because I think a lot of people need to do that for the organizations that they run.
I'm just making a note of it. It'd be great to hear your words another time when there is more time on culture.
Sure.
We did speak to one great author, Andrew Kim, who was dealing with the idea of how culture connects to strategy. And I think that was our first dip into that. So when the series turns to that topic, we'll be certain to be back in touch with you to hear your words on that.
Of course.
But Mitch, I've loved hearing from you. As I might have guessed, there's much more to this than I initially perceived. Where can people find you?
MitchRusso360.com. Using that one URL, you'll have access to my LinkedIn. You'll have access to all social media. You'll have access to my different websites and products. Everything is there.
MitchRusso360.com.
Right. And if you're a coach, I would go right to coachelevation.com and grab the book. It's free, and actually read it. Don't let it die in your desktop graveyard of ebooks. It's really important.